Good morning, good evening. I hope all of you are having a wonderful day. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. The RICS World Built Environment Forum webinar series is presented today in partnership with AECOM. I would also like to thank our corporate partner, A-Site, who's the lead tech partner for the World Built Environment Forum. In today's webinar, we'll be discussing next-gen transport infrastructure towards a safer, faster, and more sustainable future. I will be your moderator. My name is Anil Sahani. I am the Global Program Lead, Construction Sector for the RICS, and I'll helping moderate the session, ask questions to our expert panel. So essentially today, what we are going to do is discuss the current wave of innovation in the transportation sector with the help of our experts. We'll talk about various issues, beginning with what kind of innovation is taking place and how does that impact the infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure that is being put in place by various governments. This is probably a very timely discussion given so much emphasis being paid on the transportation sector, more specifically the infrastructure sector broadly by various governments across the globe. I know there are politicians are stuck in a political volleyball discussing issues related to and tinkering with the current state of our infrastructure and filling the backlog and the gap. But I think it's equally important to look ahead, look forward, and see how the next gen transportation infrastructure is going to shape up and help our society. So with me today, I have an expert panel that's going to discuss the questions that we have framed. First is Joseph Alessia, Senior Vice President, Corporate Development, Ferrovial Airports.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Welcome, Joseph. Next with us is Elizabeth Burnett. She's Senior Vice President, Managing Principal for AECOM's Georgia and Florida offices and East Region Lead for the Tech and Logistics Practice, AECOM. Hi, Elizabeth.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm glad to be with you today.
Next is Suzanne Murtha, Vice President and Global Lead for Connected and Automated Technology at AECOM. Welcome, Suzanne. You're on mute.
I am totally on mute. It's nice to be here.
Thank you. We are expecting Ernest Huffman, Aviation Planning and Education Program Manager, North Central Texas Council of Governments, to join shortly. He's having some technical difficulties. So with that, I think we have our panel in place. And before I begin, I'll just like to ensure that we take care of some of the housekeeping. We have expecting participants from over 20 countries today for this webinar. We have essentially a questions box on your control panel. So for all attendees, you're welcome to type in your questions and we'll try and connect those questions if possible with our questioning of the experts, but we'll also try and connect those questions back into our summary or concluding remarks as we finish this webinar. So I encourage you to please put in your questions in the questions box. You may do that at any time during this webinar. So let me begin our discussion today with asking this question, and I'll ask Suzanne to get us started. So essentially, we are looking at next-gen transportation infrastructure. How capable is today's infrastructure for tomorrow's transport? What needs to be done to make transport infrastructure ready for the next-gen vehicles?
Thanks, Anil. I think the answer to that question depends on the type of technology, right? So a lot of our folks refer to the term CAV, meaning connected and automated technology or connected automated vehicles. And the reality is that there aren't very many CAVs, right? There are connected vehicles and there are automated vehicles, and there are electric vehicles, but they're not always the same in the same vehicle. So it largely depends on the technology. When we look at connected vehicles, if we're talking about telematics, that means the modem that's installed in the vehicles communicates with the automotive manufacturers. There's probably not much infrastructure needed to support them other than cell towers and cell spots. When we talk about automated vehicles, that's very interesting too, because it depends on who you ask. The automotive manufacturers feel somewhat strongly that there should be no adaptation of the environment to their needs, because each automotive manufacturer has a different approach to how they execute automation. And so they feel that they will adapt their vehicles to the infrastructure. And then there are some infrastructure providers like CAVNU, for example, who feel strongly that there can be adaptations made to the environment that will enable the automation to function more efficiently, and will be able to reduce the amount of interventions of a person in the machine-based driving. So it really depends on who you talk to, and really depends on where you are. And I think that that's very interesting. And then when we have technologies like electrification, again, location dependent, different policies in different states and different cities. But I think that there's largely, it could be said, a lot of work to be done to have the infrastructure be able to support the amount of electrification that's going to be anticipated even in the next 5 to 10 years. So we think we have a lot of work for that. And then I would certainly look for Beth and Joseph to talk about the infrastructure necessary, for example, eVTOLs. They're incredible experts on that topic, so I'll pass it to them for that.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think that's an excellent start to our conversation. I was just curious if Joseph and Elizabeth, you have anything, because as I see it, this sort of goes into this issue of systems, because your transportation infrastructure now needs to be well in sync with the energy infrastructure as we begin to talk about next-gen transportation and all the innovation taking place in mobility. So what are your views about our current state of the infrastructure, especially when we start thinking about at least transportation and energy infrastructure having that requirement of synchronization?
Well, if I may, and Joe, feel free to jump in. We are, especially when it comes to EVs, I think the world actually understands EV charging right now. I mean, there are several large scale rollouts of EVs and EV charging opportunities. I think when you start to get into some of these new modes of transportation, and Joe will talk a lot about eVTOL and Ferrovial's experience with eVTOLs. I think we are at the very beginning of understanding the kind of electrical infrastructure that is going to be required to support these new modes. And I think, we're going to talk a little bit about in this discussion about multimodal facilities. But when you start, layering EVs, eVTOLs, and other forms of multimodal transportation into a physical building or physical infrastructure, I think that's where we're at least in the United States, where we're going to see some really interesting studies about the amount of power. I think there's going to be some eye-opening discoveries about the amount of power that's going to be required to support all this EV charging.
Yeah, I agree with you, Beth, on that 100%. And I think if you look at aviation in general, even pre 9/11 to where we are today, there's a difference when you have airports or even cities that are newly developed, like in China or the Middle East, and existing cities and airports that are already existing. You have to morph into what is needed at that time. prior to 9/11, it wasn't security. Yes, security was there, and then it was enhanced. Now you're getting into the smart, the technologies, the long lines, the different requirements, and the airports have to keep on changing. So that's one of the things that we're looking into now is future proofing the design of the vertiports to anticipate or at least give room for some of these changes as they occur in eVTOL technology. It's in its incubation stage. It's at the very beginning. So we're still trying to find out what all these requirements are going to mean it on the infrastructure part. But answering the question, what needs to be done to existing infrastructure, let's say for example, an airport, well, we know they have fuels. eVTOLs are, the E is for electric. That power requirement for the charging infrastructure, there's a lot of power needed. And the other thing I guess we could talk about are just VTOLs, which are similar flying dynamics, but they might be powered by hydrogen. So now you have a large electrical requirement and other fueling requirements potential for all these different type of aircraft. So there's a lot yet to figure out and a lot more to come.
Thank you, Joe. I think to continue on that front, let's move to our second question, and I'll request Joe if you can help us answer that question. So in your view, how close are we to urban air mobility becoming another form of commuter transport? I recently saw a video by somebody at Uber showing these fancy sci-fi looking stuff. How close are we to these electrical vertical takeoff and landing kind of transportation mechanisms?
We're here already. It's started. The vehicles are flying. Some of them are very close to their certified version when they will be transporting people or products. But if you look at drones, they're already experimenting. Amazon and UPS and others are looking into some of these, which is a part of the air mobility as a whole. So we're here. You have 200 plus players just in eVTOLs. I think it's fair to say that there'll be some consolidation, or if it was a sport, some of the teams are going to lose either because of technology or financing. So I think over time it will need to shrink up. There's too many players, and on the infrastructure side, because there's so many players, if you don't have commonality between charging infrastructures or fuels, it would be the equivalent of having automakers with different spouts to put gasoline in the car. You go to a gas station that fills up any fuel. So that's part of the importance with so many players that, and this kind of gets into the regulatory government end of things, that there needs to be some input on that. So this could work. When we're building the infrastructure, it's as lean and proficient as possible.
Just a quick follow on to maybe help our audience understand this urban air mobility a bit more. Joe, back to you. I'd like to sort of figure out what can eVTOLs do for us today that are, let's say, cars and trains and other modes, the current modes can't do. How does that change or have an impact on the infrastructure?
So I think the biggest part is the footprint. The footprint for an eVTOL is the smallest. These land and take off like a helicopter. So theoretically, you could have roughly a 30-foot diameter landing area, and that fulfills your needs. That, of course, isn't what the infrastructure is going to look like. But if you're looking at size-wise, you're roughly about 1 acre to 2 acres in size for each vertiport location. If you take automobiles, roads, highways, bridges. If you look at trains, track, land, bridges. And I think that's the difference here is when you're building railroads and roads, you have a lot of disruptive activities when it comes to land, noise, people's lives. If you're looking to build a new railroad today or tracks or a highway, well, you have to get that land. Sometimes people don't want to give up their land. And then you could look at the environmental factors of all the construction and even wildlife not being able to get from one end of the region to another, for example. So it's less impactful if you look at it in infrastructure. Now, what can eVTOL do that the other modes cannot? I think it's convenience. You can get in a car to travel across country. You could get in a plane. You could get in a train. And eVTOL right now is not for those long journeys. It's, you know, it's up to a regional. But as battery technology excels, there's a trade-off. You could either go further or carry more weight for each individual aircraft. So it's the convenience. That's the biggest part, and a very limited impact on environment as a whole.
Thank you, Joe. I think we made an excellent point on not in my backyard, how that connects to this discussion. I noticed Elizabeth or Suzanne. Elizabeth, would you like to add to our conversation, and then maybe Suzanne?
Well, I mean, in terms of the not in my backyard, I mean, the eVTOLs, you know, as we are beginning to understand, are extremely quiet. They're a fraction of the noise of a helicopter. And in fact, I mean, you can get on several of the eVTOL websites when they're actually, you know, really starting to understand the noise. But in terms of, I just want to go back, I think, and talk about, you know, becoming, how close are we to urban air mobility? And, you know, to Joe's point, he said, you know, we're now, because even though we're not building roads, we're not building railroads, we have to build buildings. We have to build infrastructure. There are permits. There are, you know, authorities having jurisdiction involved, including, you know, both the FAA in the United States and, you know, ESA in Europe. So that takes time. So even though we're building a small footprint, if you start to back up, and most of these eVTOL manufacturers want to be flying in the 2024, 2025 timeframe, you have to build a network of infrastructure to support the business. And so, you know, how close are we to urban air mobility? I mean, I think, you know, back to Joe's point, it is now, because you've got a plan for the infrastructure, and it's not just one building. You have to build a system to make these business models work.
Suzanne?
And then adding to Beth and Joseph, I want to go back to the question to highlight a little bit about, you know, the benefits of an eVTOL system versus ground system. And ground systems are great. That's where most of my work is. So I don't want to disparage anybody on the ground because it's awesome. But we do have, you know, 40,000 fatalities every year, and we've become almost numb to the amount of crashes and the amount of fatalities and injuries and costs that we have related to ground transportation. So I'm really looking forward to offloading some of that. And my colleague Paul, who works with me on the automation team, he says that the biggest problem with automation is people, because people are down on the ground and people get in front of cars, people get in front of automated vehicles, they get in front of not automated vehicles, and there are fewer people in the sky. So I'm really excited about the potential of offloading some of that capacity from the ground transportation, potentially saving some lives and some injuries with the work that Joe and Beth are doing.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent discussion, and probably jumping off to our Next question, question 3, and I think I'm going to ask Joe to help us with this, get started, and then ask others to pitch in as well. So what other forms of new transport are likely in the future? Is the hyperloop, for example, as we said previously, a reality or a hype?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and you had mentioned previously how you saw either a video animation of a company on what they're planning to do, or beautiful renderings. And I used the sentence a couple weeks ago where that, yeah, that's great, that's beautiful, but really a lot of that it's art, because you could anticipate or look what you want this to all look like, but in reality, this is what we're doing now. And we already know that a lot of these things aren't going to happen in the very near future. For example, landing in your backyard, or thinking you're going to have a garage for one of these and they're going to fly autonomous. That is very well down the line. But to stick to this point here, I think I mentioned in the past railroads or trains, which would be a good comparison for the Hyperloop. Technology-wise, it is great. It is, it's remarkable, the speeds that it could achieve, but you have the same problem that you're going to have with a railroad or a road. You have to get that land or those permissions. There may be tunneling, and even on a bigger end for a Hyperloop, you're in a tube that will need to have the strength to hold a vacuum. So with that being said, you have the vacuum systems that need to have maintenance. You have just the cost of steel or whatever that tube is made out of to hold these vacuums, the electricity for the magnet systems to work. It's great. It works. They've proved that, but there's always going to be a cost associated, not only on the infrastructure cost, but on the environmental cost or the visual cost of looking out and seeing this tube similar to a very large pipeline going across the country. The other comparison would be, which is, I won't say it's a proof of concept, but the Elon Musk boring company, what they've done in Las Vegas. It's not new what they're doing. They're just taking the existing boring technology, shrinking it down, and it's much easier to even drill a hole in wood with a very small drill bit compared to a large drill bit. It's easier, it's quicker, and I think that's what people have to realize. Anything could be done, but there's a financial cost or environmental cost or other things.
Thank you, Joe. I think connecting that to existing construction technology, especially TBM, is very, very important, because you not only need to have these conceptualized, designed, engineered, but eventually constructed. And I think, Elizabeth, you mentioned about buildings and infrastructure and the need to think about those alongside what this next gen transport would look like. I wonder if Suzanne, would you like to add anything to this topic? Then Elizabeth.
Yeah. I'd like to add to what Joe said. I think that this is not a new form of transport, but I think what I'm looking forward to working on is full automated trips. So we develop a lot of automation in individual pockets, right? We're developing eVTOL sort of independently of automated truck movement or automated goods movement, or automated people movement. But I'm looking forward to having full trip automation so that we can look at how to automate the flight of good movement, the movement of goods on ships and cargo ships, on containers, and then also have automated trucks pick them up at the port, have the ports automated, have those systems automated. So it's not quite a new type, but it is new to integrate all of them, and that's something that I'm looking forward to in the near term.
Elizabeth?
Well, and I guess, going back to Joe's point about cost, because all these businesses are, basically startups. And so, how do you start up cost a Hyperloop? I'm not sure how you do that. I know, in again, just back to the vertiports, we have there's a business model that has a limited capex because this is an unproven form of transportation, and so I think the hyperloop and then things and systems like that are going to be a bit hamstrung just because of the initial upfront cost for an unproven business model.
Thank you. I'm going to do something here. I saw a very interesting question. Our discussion so far has been through the lenses of us deep into the transportation infrastructure sector, looking at more from how you deliver these. There's an interesting question looking at the end user or a customer point of view. I can tell you, me and my wife will think 220 times before sending my son to school on an eVTOL anytime soon. So what does customer confidence, end user confidence do in this discussion? Brief, but I'd like to hear from all three of you. Let's start with Suzanne, over to Elizabeth, and then Joe.
Right, that's been something very interesting, and I don't think there have been good studies to answer that question, Anil, so I think it's a good one. I think what we've seen is when it comes to new tech, for example, a single crash happens in an automated vehicle and it can sometimes shut down the whole industry, right? And we know that certainly it's terrible to have a fatality. It's certainly terrible to have a crash. We also know that is a very fantastic thing, right? It's very impactful when there's a crash in an automated vehicle, and in the meantime, that vehicle has saved countless lives, right? We're not counting the good that is done. We're counting the splashy bad news, right? Which is very unfortunate. So I think that the customer acceptance on the ground side, and certainly Joe and Beth can talk about the air side, is a fascinating phenomenon. And I think, and I'm hoping that the sort of slowdown in the deployment of fully and highly automated vehicles, I'm hoping that slowdown is giving more of a chance for folks to become more accepting of the technology. And I think that it's also been great that the traditional automotive manufacturers have been slow to add automation applications to vehicles. So, when we buy, every couple of years, more applications are added: automated lane keeping, assisted steering, assisted braking. So it's good that those applications are coming in slowly. I think that will help build acceptance for sure.
Elizabeth, and then Joe.
Yeah. I mean, from my point of view, there are going to be early adopters. They're going to be people that say, okay, I'm willing to try something new because the value of my time, and let's say in the case of eVTOL, is really worth something. And so there will be early adopters, and Anil, there will be people that will think twice before putting their loved one on an eVTOL. I, for one, I mean, I can't wait. I'd be one of the first people after it goes through the FAA process and all the safety ramifications that entails. Yeah, I'm an early adopter.
I'm going to take a completely different perspective on this. This is actually something that I worked on in the university when I was studying aviation. Is, to what you said, Anil, I'm going to think before I put my child on this vehicle. And if you just use mathematics and probabilities and comparisons between the safety factors of commercial aviation and any type of land travel, it's not even close. It is so far off. And I think that's something that the airlines should have done years and years ago, is educate people on safety, the differences between what a pilot goes through in driving a car, the maintenance of an aircraft, the number of people involved when it comes to separation of traffic of aircraft, and to bring eVTOL into that same idea, it will be certified. Our partner in Florida, the Lilium, who are building the Lilium jet, that will be certified to 10 to the -9, which is the equivalent of an Airbus or a Boeing aircraft. So why are people afraid to fly? I think a lot of it is you have to blame the media. When an aircraft goes down, you hear about it. Why? Because it doesn't happen very often. Cars crash and people die every day. We don't hear about it in the news because it's not news anymore. And when people see, when the media for weeks about a plane crash or a train accident, they get scared. They're afraid at that point. So I think that's something that could be done not only in aviation, but in eVTOLs, right next to your emergency card, maybe having another card educating people about these things to calm them down and to show how safe it is. And I think, in my opinion, that eVTOL are on a safety level even more than a Boeing or a traditional fixed wing aircraft, and definitely a helicopter because of redundancies. They have many different batteries. They have many different computer systems, and with the number of motors or engines, depending on the aircraft, most of these eVTOLs can lose some of those engines or motors and continue flight, and you would never know about it. And then the worst case, that if there is some type of failure, when you don't need a runway like a fixed wing aircraft, you could land on a road, you could land on a golf course. And even when I was in flight training, that's what we did. We looked for roads and areas that we could land the plane, at least save lives, but you're not too worried about the aircraft. And when you have an eVTOL, it's, I think, much easier to just land straight down, and the bottom line, people will live, they'll survive, and they shouldn't even be scratched, really.
Well, excellent points made. To me, two major things I think that I picked up from your conversation. One, there's definitely a need to take on that end user customer worldview and do some studies as these emerging technologies further evolve. And secondly, I think I agree with you, Vince. I think from my heart when making that decision about sending. I think it's crucial education and having clear data and information available for end users to be more convinced. So moving on, I think we'll look at our next question, and I'll ask Elizabeth to get us started. Multimodal is claimed to be the future of transport. How will multimodal influence the design of transport infrastructure?
So I'd like to take a little bit of a different approach to this question, because I think, multimodal right now is acceptable. You have trains and buses, you have parkings and tram, so you have multimodal that is acceptable right now. I think right now, adding a potentially a flight like an eVTOL component to a multimodal facility, I think that's something that in the future, again, as we're looking at a power design, the more we can consolidate like transportation functions, I think the better it will be. I think the bigger question here is, how is multimodal going to really affect the future design of cities? And, I think that while, yes, it'll affect the transportation systems, we feel that, a multimodal facility is really going to become kind of a future hub in urban areas, and particularly it could even be more of a hub in suburban areas. We recently did a quick study my lights just went off, in the US for a tolling agency that was looking to transform some of their manned toll booths into, again, multimodal facilities to accommodate, logistics, accommodate potentially eVTOL, and to become kind of a park and ride for their clients. So I think we're going to see a whole new model of multimodal facilities. I think we've got to get over kind of the competitive nature. I know right now, the eVTOL and some of the regional train folks don't play well together, because right now everyone's seen as competition. So I think we've got to get over that and look at it more as what does it say, co-opetition.
Joe, would you like to add to that? Perhaps also comment a little bit about our sort of skills and competencies in design, engineering, urban planning when we think of this new multimodal.
Yeah, I think I touched on this already in a previous question, where there's a difference when you could plan a city from a blank sheet of paper, and then when you have existing infrastructure already in place. It goes down to cost again. What are the limiting factors when trying to add inter or multimodal facilities to have that seamless integration between different modes of transport? It goes down to cost. If you have an airport, yes, you have some locations where you have either an airport tram or train that gets you to another location. Some of the newer airports have larger railroads connected that you could go throughout a region. So if you look at anything other than eVTOL to connect these, there's just going to be a huge cost associated with that. As we already mentioned, for land and who's going to pay for it, et cetera. So that's again where eVTOL really comes into place, where you have a small footprint. So if you take a existing airport, you're adding to it. Not so much in the footprint, but you have to adjust the airport to accept these vertiports, these locations, and integrate it. And it's a whole nother discussion as far as airspace and integration of eVTOLs with existing infrastructure and airspace. But I think it'll be a small impact, to say, to make it easy. For OVL, we actually received our first lease of an airport in the United States in Palm Beach last week. So we worked long and hard with them and the FAA and others in order to do so. And so we know the hurdles that we're facing on other locations, but this was a big step, and we're going to move forward.
Suzanne, your views on multimodal?
I think that Beth and Joe covered it really well. The only thing I will do is channel my inner Ernest, because he's not here, and he would talk to you about Texas. So Texas is a great example of where this is. Intermodality is really being executed, probably maybe better than anywhere else. So we have we have eVTOL manufacturers and operators looking to work in Texas. We have almost all of the automated truck manufacturers are trying to operate in or through that region. They have told me that they find Texas to be the best environment to be able to execute automated truck and goods movement. And then we also have existing rail yards there that are specifically looking to be intermodal and also looking to be automated, right? So we have Texas becoming a sort of hub of that intermodality for infrastructure. So let's watch them.
Thank you. Joe, could you help us with the next question that talks about how will next-gen transport infrastructure change the way we travel for leisure? For example, what will airports of the future look like?
Well, if you look at Airports now, airports in the past, the function is still the same. People go, the infrastructure assists them to get on the aircraft, they go and they come back. Has that changed? No. What has changed, what people want, number one, they want the more convenience, the tech, and what do the airports want? The airports want more revenue. So now airports have turned into shopping malls and restaurants, and it's a non-aviation generating monies that you could use towards enhancing more of that infrastructure. But the bottom line, airports haven't changed as far as their function. What they look like has changed. And I think the same could be said that I don't think that the infrastructure is going to change that much. It's going to be different. It's going to look different. And I think it's more of associated with the previous question, which is the connecting of different modes, which we're looking at right now. How many people are going to use an eVTOL to connect? Some maybe, but that's where this is a little bit different, that a vertiport doesn't have to be at an airport. It could be throughout a city. There could be many within a city, and I think that would ultimately be the plan. And the other aspect of this is eVTOL as a whole is not the same. What Lilium is doing is different than what eHang is doing. You have different mileage, you have different number of passengers. Some are designed and are going to be built to go from the north part of a city to the south part of the city, very short trips. And others like the Liliums and Joby are for, the greater 200 miles. So, it's not one size fit all, and there's a lot of unknowns right now. But as far as the infrastructure goes, that's what we're doing. We're, like we mentioned, we're future proofing. We need to ensure that the facility that we're designing and building will be able to morph into something in the future without having to knock it down and rebuild that you see within the United States. And I think that's the other part that could be talked about. I worked at Chicago O'Hare. That airport doesn't look anything the same from 10 years ago till now. You wouldn't recognize it except for the terminals. The airfield changed, and now there's work to be in the terminals. Salt Lake City, they created a new airport on the old footprint. And that's what within the United States you don't have these open spaces like Denver has, where you could build a new airport from scratch. So we're very limited on what the future holds in your major cities as far as airports go. You have to use the footprint that you have. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes right after an airport finishes the $5 billion construction, you go in there and it's the worst thing in the world, because you have to take 20 minutes from walk to one area to the other. It looks pretty though.
Thanks, Joe. Suzanne, in your view, how would the customer experience look like?
Well, I think, on the surface, the surface transportation, not on the surface of the concept, and service transport on the roads, I think that, and I'm talking maybe not next most recent gen, but maybe next gen, 2 generations forward, is I want to point to the work that FHWA, Federal Highways Administration, is doing in their CARMA program. That's CARMA. They are looking at how to do cooperative automation. And so, there are many other folks working with cooperative automation. Federal Highway has a program called CARMA, and it's related to how we let the vehicles communicate with each other when they're automated. So it's not a person making decisions about how not to crash into a car or how to maneuver around something. It's the vehicles themselves communicating with each other in a network to decide how to make decisions. So when we talk about how we travel, it will look different. It will potentially, if humans are not driving and vehicles are indeed able to communicate with each other and understand each other, we are less likely to have traffic signs and signals and road roadways won't be controlled by externalities like signs. So I think that might be something that looks very different. Also likely to see a lot fewer crashes and a lot more efficient mobility. So there won't be any slowdowns because vehicles will let each other know when they need to slow down and can move around those types of scenarios. Right. Another interesting thing that we are likely to see going forward is different payment systems. So we haven't talked about that, but how we pay for transportation, right? Because we're likely to see electric vehicles, in the U.S., well, probably other places too, our gas tax pays for the infrastructure. So a certain percentage of what we pay at the gas tank goes to the state, and some goes to federal to fund the roadways. As electric vehicles have become more prevalent and gas mileage has improved dramatically over the past 20 or 30 years, we have much less inflow of funding to support roadways. And so we've been able to augment that with things like toll systems, right? But generally, the overall transportation system desperately needs funding. And so I think that is a change that you'll see. I think we're likely to move to a RUC, it's called road use charge system. And that may look different. It may look like we may not have toll gantries, in 20, 30 years out. We will be making payments directly from the vehicle to the infrastructure. And so that will also look different. That'll look different in how our vehicle directly makes payments.
Elizabeth, anything to add to that conversation?
Yeah, so I mean, back to airports, and I just think we are going to see an explosion of technology in airports to make passengers' life easy. So, I mean, to give you an example, I dropped my cell phone a couple weeks ago. I was traveling through Miami. I got on their website. They have a services website, and a cell phone fix a place met me. So I was able to get my cell phone fixed, in between my flights. The availability of getting food delivered to your gate. So you don't have to look for food. You can order it on your plane before you get out. I just think the advances in technology in and around airports to enhance the customer experience is really going to change how passengers perceive the experience.
There is something I'd like to add on to that I agree with Beth 100% for somebody that loves their gadgets and has many gadgets. But if you're looking at customer experience as a whole, there's certain demographics that have not embraced that technology. My father, for example, he can't use a cell phone. So we always have to keep in mind that there are part of the flying public that are not that adept to the technology. So it's not a one size fits all. And there's other regions in the world that they have no technology and they do travel. Working in Saudi Arabia, I saw the pilgrims that were going to the Hajj and Umrah on a daily basis, and looking at them, I don't know if some of them have ever been in a car, let alone in an airplane. So when it comes to technology, yes, it's a solution, but it's not always going to be 100% solution for everybody.
Excellent. I think that sort of leads us to our next question that talks about how will all this next gen transport infrastructure change people's lives for the better? Means we've talked about customer experience at the moment, at the minute, maybe in an airport, maybe at a multimodal station, and so on. But I'd like you to comment, beginning with maybe Suzanne, if you could help us with this. Touch a little bit on maybe the sustainability dimension, maybe the safety dimension. I know we've talked a lot about safety and how actually it's more of a mindset and education issue with these innovations, really, because the numbers pretty much say the opposite in terms of safety. So touch a little bit on maybe carbon, maybe on sustainability, and other aspects of making our lives better, maybe social aspects as well.
Sure. And I don't want to blow by the safety thing because that's huge, right? AECOM is a safety culture, and that's 40,000 lives a year, and that's very important. Okay, but I can also talk about sustainability, which impacts people's lives. So I think that I've read that transportation contributes about 40% of the carbon output that we have on our planet. That might, I mean, that's not my area of expertise, but that's what I've read. And so if we could start knocking that down with electrification of fleets, and also more efficient mobility. For example, we can use connected and automated vehicles to reduce queues at traffic lights, reduce queues on the roadway. Those all contribute substantially to carbon output. And so when we can harmonize our transportation system, and it can be and we can coordinate the movements of vehicles, right? That also impacts. That's going to also impact people's lives in terms of improving the environment, decarbonizing, and also improving the general rides. I mean, the stress that folks have from driving in bad driving situations or riding in bad situations is substantial, right? So when we talk about social impact like that, transportation will become smoother and easier and safer.
Thank you. Elizabeth, your take on sustainability and safety and perhaps social issues.
Well, I mean, Joe's been talking about the, eVTOL. They operate at net zero. And, quite honestly, the vertiport, the opportunity here is to really redefine aviation's sustainability, or define sustainability for aviation, because the aviation industry is not known as being a sustainable industry. And in terms of social issues, I think, all this next gen transport is great, but if the ordinary person, can't afford it, well, then it's not so great. So, I think again, another challenge with all this is to make all this next gen transport affordable, not just to corporate executives, but affordable to everyone that wants to take it.
Joseph, would you like, I know you've sprinkled your ideas about this issue throughout, but anything else you'd like to add on carbon?
Yeah, this is a conversation actually Beth and I had a couple of weeks ago at lunch, that everyone's talking about electric. It's clean, it's clean, it's clean, which many forms it is. But as more and more industries and technologies and transport go to electric, there's something that really needs to be looked at, is the availability of that electricity. If you look at what happened in Texas during the storm last year, with power issues, if you look at California during heat waves, there's rolling blackouts because they don't have the infrastructure to sustain that amount of electricity usage. So this is something that needs to be acted upon now, so we're not so far behind. But in my personal opinion, I think we're already behind. Otherwise, you wouldn't have these issues not only within the United States, but throughout the world on energy. And what that looks like, I don't know, but I don't think that you could rely on solar panels as a whole, just the amount of acreage and space that they take, and the efficiency of those. And then if you look at other clean energies, the wind turbines, but again, my opinion is more the nuclear end, which is very clean. It's clean. It's clean energy. It's the spent fuel, which is not clean. It's just the challenge, the difficulty, and the cost associated dealing with those spent materials. But for the amount of electricity that we're going to need, thinking in practical terms, if it's not nuclear, I don't see any of these existing green technologies being able to support this.
Thank you. I think I'm going to, we have about 5 minutes left. So quickly, rapid fire, move to the next two questions that I'd really like to get in our discussion. The next question talks about money. I know that's important. I've read somewhere that everyone gets that infrastructure is important, but it always is difficult to figure out where the money comes from. And I think perfect example is few miles from where I am. I'm in the suburbs of DC, and go near the Capitol Hill today. I guess you'll all talk about the trillions of dollars that they're planning to spend. So there is a funding gap just with existing way the transportation works. What is your view on the funding gap, and how will we pay for all of this going into the future? And Suzanne has already mentioned the previous revenue generation models may be out of sync. If you're not doing gas tax, then what can we change and do for money? Elizabeth, we'll start with you, and then very brief comments, Suzanne.
Perfect. Yeah. So I personally believe there has to be a combination of government and private funding. Government just can't do it all. There are very active and in different countries public-private partnership models where the public sector actually develops the infrastructure, whether we're talking roads or buildings, has a term of a concession that then returns that infrastructure back to the government. So I'm a firm believer there's got to be a combination of both private and public funding to support this.
So what I'm going to do is the last question sort of connects these funding issues with stakeholders. So we'll look at the last question, which talks about this is not going to be solved by one group of organizations. It needs to be perhaps a partnership between government, industry, academia, and so on. So just your quick closing comments on stakeholders working together to deliver next-gen transport infrastructure. Very briefly, we can start with Suzanne, go to Joe, and then Elizabeth, if you can close.
Sure. I think that's going to be part of the next generation of transportation advancement, is doing this, is concessions, as Beth said, as working together to have technologies that can connect direct payments for direct uses of transportation instead of confusing taxes. Joseph? Joe?
Yeah, so as far as it goes for eVTOLs, there's conversations already from the federal level, the county level, local level, and this is really probably one of the most important parts of the success of eVTOL and infrastructure, is to create an easier process in order to get into certain locations. Zoning's difficult. There's a lot of different things that we need support from the government on a federal level to make this work.
Thanks, Joe. Elizabeth?
And I think, from my perspective, and actually from AECOM's perspective, I can do a little commercial for AECOM here. We have, in order to solve these complex problems, we have our transportation teams, our aviation teams, our automated vehicle teams, and our building teams all collectively working together to solve these problems. You can't solve this problem in a silo. So, we are combining all this expertise to look at this problem holistically. And I think we've come up with some really good, innovative solutions.
Yeah, I think I agree. A siloed approach probably would not work well with next-gen transport infrastructure. So thank you very much for sharing your views, your time, and your expertise with us. I'm quite sure this conversation could have continued. Personally, I wanted to ask you your views on how does this impact emerging country economies, like what does this do to transportation infrastructure in India? But that's perhaps a topic for our next webinar. With that, I'd like to thank you all. Thanks, Joe, for taking the time. Thank you, Elizabeth and Suzanne. Ernest couldn't join. I'm sure we'll get him on our next webinar. So thank you for taking the time. With this, I'd like to close, but before closing, I just want to give you a quick glimpse of what's coming next. We have several future webinars that are coming into play. We have the COP26 mini series. We have in November quite a few construction real estate related webinars that may be of interest to you. I'd like to highlight the Global Commercial Real Estate Monitor results for Q3 and Global Construction Monitor results for Q3 as well. We also have on our next slide some information. So I'd again like to thank our lead tech partner, A-Site, for helping us with this webinar. I'd also like to highlight on the next slide our upcoming global event, the World Built Environment Forum Summit that's taking place in Dubai 2022, 24th, 25 January. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you, remind you to please take a few minutes to complete an online poll, which will appear on your screen as the webinar ends. So thank you very much. Bye.